Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, a new, more effective way to create and manage SBOMs. My name is Kendra Morton. I'm a Principal Product Marketing Manager at Revenera, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. So Revenera had an exciting new product announcement a couple of weeks ago. We released a new solution called SBOM Insights, which we'll talk about today. So in today's session, we'll talk about how important it is to scan and discover what's in your code and ultimately produce a software bill of materials. But what if you could collect information from all corners of your organization, as well as from upstream supply chain partners that sit outside your organization? Our speakers today will present that and more. But before I get them introduced and we dive into really what's driving the need for this type of solution, a few quick notes to make your experience in our webinar platform just a little bit better. So if you would like to submit a question, over on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a Q&A tab. Please type in your question there, and you can do that at any time throughout the event. You don't have to wait until the end. We'll stop a couple of times throughout to address questions. And then we'll also monitor the chat area if you would prefer to put your questions there instead of the Q&A tab. Sometimes that can get confusing. Hopefully not the case, but we do know that things happen. If you're having any technical difficulty, head on over to the chat and you can message my friend and colleague, Jacob Ward. He's the mastermind behind the scenes and he'll get it all sorted out for you. And finally, we have some resources under the handouts tab relevant to today's topic. Be sure to head over there before signing out and have your pick of reading material to kind of broaden the discussion and learn more about SBOM Insights. All right, so let's get started. Our speakers today are Alex Ryback and Sean Geary. Alex is the Senior Director of Product Management at Revenera. He owns the thought leadership and overall direction for all SCA products. Alex also heads up Revenera's open source program office and is a member of the internal cybersecurity and incident response team at Revenera. He's been with the company, formerly Palomita, since 2006 and has worked in several roles that run the gamut, including professional services, technical support, pre-sales support, solutions engineering, and product management. Prior to Revenera, Alex spent 7 years at Selectica under various roles, including professional services, pre-sales support, and solutions engineering. Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining today.
Hi, Kendra. Good to be here.
Yeah. Sean is a principal solution engineer at Revenera, responsible for all the technical aspects of the company's software composition analysis solutions as part of the sales process. He started at Revenera in early 2017, supporting the software monetization product family until October of 2018, when he began covering Code Insight for all pre-sales activities. Prior to Revenera, Sean spent many years supporting both pre- and post-sales activities for developer solutions at a large semiconductor company. Hi, Sean. Thanks for joining today.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. Fantastic. We're ready to go. Alex, I'll pass the ball over to you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kendra, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So as Kendra mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, we did announce a new cloud offering. So we wanted to do this webinar to go into a little more detail on what that solution is, what it does, the business problems that it solves. But before we get to the product and the demo, I did want to spend some time and kind of explain what were the driving forces behind us going on this adventure and kind of what we're seeing in the market that's really driving the need for an SBOM solution. So I will go through the industry background, talk about the product overview, then Sean will do a demo. And I will finish up at the end. We'll stop in a couple of places, make sure that we answer any questions if people have them along the way. So please use the chat and go ahead and post questions and we will get to them. Okay, so as many of you know, the way kind of the fundamental approach to building software has changed significantly over the past couple of decades. It used to be that your engineering team essentially had full control over the code, wrote everything themselves, and very rarely did code come in from the outside. However, today we are seeing that there's a lot more use, obviously, of open source, a lot more piecing together modules and kind of writing the glue in applications along with proprietary algorithms. So there's lots more content coming into the company. So if you look at a typical application, it's comprised of some commercial content, there's proprietary code, but then commercial packages also contain open source components. And if you dig deeper, open source components contain further open source components. So you end up having lots of dependencies, including in cases of copy paste within your proprietary code. So at the end of the day, your application that used to be fully controlled and managed by your own engineering team now contains lots of content from places that you may trust, so well-known kind of repository ecosystems, but also could be individual developers around the world. And the challenge is to be able to catalog and understand where all of these pieces are coming from and whom to reach out to if a fix needs to be made. So today we are in a situation where industry has a huge reliance on open source, and that reliance continues to grow. There's a really sharp increase in number of dependencies, and we'll talk about that. There's a really high frequency of security exploits, and the nature of the exploits has changed quite a bit over time. And we're kind of at a perfect storm for supply chain security. So what that really means is most likely you are consuming code from outside your company. You are selling your applications either directly to your end customers, or perhaps you're developing software development kits or other assets and selling them to your partners, who then wrap them in applications and sell them to their customers. So most likely you are part of a software supply chain, and it's really important to understand the inputs and outputs of where your company sits to be able to properly secure your applications and make sure that you keep them secure and up to date over time. So the analogy that we really like to talk about is looking at a hardware supply chain as compared to a software supply chain. There's lots of parallels between the two, but there's a really stark difference, which is really the maturity level. So if you look at a typical complex product, so let's take a Boeing airplane. It is comprised of millions of parts, but the parts are not a flat list, right? There's lots of subassemblies that go into other subassemblies that ultimately become a part that gets connected and out comes an airplane. If you look at Boeing's vendor ecosystem, right, they've got trusted vendors that go through a certification process. There's quality guidelines. There's lots of processes to go through to get certified. And there's tooling. There's enterprise resource planning systems that have been around for decades. So there's a mature set of software to be able to handle the vendors, to be able to record and track all the parts. So if there's any sort of quality issue with a plane or something happens, every single nut and bolt can be traced back to the supplier. The quality of the part can be measured against the contract that was in place, and then fixes can be made and suppliers can be replaced if there's quality issues. If you look on the right side, what we show here is a similar concept around software. So a big chunk of your software is not developed by your product teams. There's lots of monolithic packages, single binaries, individual files, and even copy-paste content coming into your applications. But we don't have the maturity level on the software side. We don't have quality software to track software vendors. Unlike Boeing that only purchases parts from trusted partners, in the software world, any developer can go out, grab any single component from various locations. You don't necessarily know the developers that are maintaining those packages. So there's a lot more risk because there's just less controls as parts come into the application. Furthermore, what we see is typically there's only about 20% of an application that is comprised of proprietary code. The other 80% and often higher is actually code coming from the outside. Similarly, if you look at a Boeing plane, Boeing builds the tail fin, they build the rear fuselage, and they build the fairing to connect the wings to the fuselage. That's it. Everything else they are sourcing from thousands of vendors around the world and having all those parts be tracked and quality controlled over time. So this is the part that's really lacking on the software side, and this is the part that we hope to help control with our new software offering. If we further kind of unwind the perfect storm statement and we look at open source usage, so we see the bill of material continue to get larger. It is more complex. It's more difficult to manage and secure because it is comprised of so many different programming languages, so many different repositories, multi-phase builds. There's lots of moving pieces. There's lots of parts. On average, in our audit practices, we see about 2,300 parts per audit that we do. That's about a 15% increase year over year from 2020 to 2021. And in 2022, we're seeing that number growing even higher. Now, even though the average is 2,300, we have had audits in the past that had 10,000, 30,000, 40,000 parts. And this is certainly beyond anything that can be managed in a spreadsheet or even be visualized in a single view. If we look at security vulnerabilities, we see them also increasing both in volume, right? Every day there's a new article talking about a new security exploit, but also in sophistication and impact, right? This is no longer a single rogue actor sitting in their garage, trying to hack your product. There's foreign nations behind this. There's lots of funding to be able to get to privacy data, be able to get to financial information, to be able to get to folks' social security numbers. So there's lots of investment and lots of activities on trying to get in to applications and get content that would be valuable for somebody to purchase. When we did a survey last year, we saw that about 64% of our respondents were somehow impacted by a supply chain attack. And on average, whenever we do an audit, we're seeing about 217 security vulnerabilities per audit, which means that there is remediation work to be done essentially in every single scan that we do. So that brings us to, well, given all that, what are our customers demanding from us? Well, they're demanding more transparency into their software supply chain. They need to be able to mitigate risks both from open source and third-party components in the applications that they build. And the challenge is that there's lots of different tooling out there, but number one, it's really hard to aggregate the results. And number two, lots of the tooling out there can really only tell you what it knows based on what you can ask it to scan. So if you are receiving content from outside the company that is not going through your software composition analysis scanning, and you don't have access to the source code to scan and understand what parts are included in that software, that's a blind spot into the composition of your applications. So what has happened is there has been a push in the industry for what is called a software bill of material. So let's talk about what that means. So a software bill of material is essentially your soup can label on what are the parts inside your application. It is a formal and queryable record that contains details and relationships of various components used in building software. So what does that mean? Number one, it has to have relationships, right? The parts in your software are not flat. Parts are there due to somebody requesting them. So it's important to understand the provenance of where the parts came from, but also dependency relationships to understand where to make a fix if there's a licensing or a security issue. Right? You're not going to necessarily fix every single component in your application. You may have to go upstream, fix a particular library, which in turn will bring in new dependencies and more modern versions, and therefore resolve a security issue. So relationships are really important. Understanding the details of the parts is critical. You need to know what is the component, what is the version. You need to understand the licensing implications, and you need to understand any associated security vulnerabilities, as well as which of these vulnerabilities are actually impactful in the product and exploitable. Right? Just because there's a vulnerability posted on a repository doesn't mean that the way your product is used or the way that it's deployed will subject you to being exploitable based on that vulnerability. So that security assessment is also important. And it has to be formal and queryable because this data has to be shared across organizations. So you don't want to be sending a Word document spelling everything out. It needs to be a document that can be machine readable, can be interpreted, and can be matched against other components so that you have a concrete bill of material that's actionable and encompasses all of the different ingredients that go into an application. So let's talk about, well, what is driving the SBOM adoption, right? There's lots of forces out there that are really driving adoption. So last year in May of 2021, there was an executive order put forth by the Biden administration to improve the nation's cybersecurity. And it was essentially a 10-point plan, one of which was to increase the transparency of what software is being purchased and deployed by the US government and military. And the executive order was nothing new in concept, right? There's been lots of other industry groups around healthcare and automotive and energy and consumer goods, lots of different agencies in the European Union around cloud and IoT, medical payments, and so forth that have talked about a bill of material, talked about a free and open source bill of material, talked about understanding the composition of whatever products are sold in their industry. But the executive order, when it was issued, really gave a big push to lots of organizations trying to figure out how they can comply with this executive order. So there's been meetings with the White House around open source security. There's been bills going through Congress and the Department of Homeland Security around getting better around supply chain management. There's been best practices written by the NTIA and NIST around how developers should incorporate tooling and processes to provide better supply chain security. And just recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was a memorandum issued that essentially updated the guidance and essentially said that the US government will now have to comply with the NIST guidelines, which include software bill of materials and any subsequent updates. So CISA, which is a government organization related that's working on cybersecurity and infrastructure, is charged with publishing updated SBOM guidance and also in charge of defining a common form for conformance statements. And conformance statements are essentially a statement by a software producer that says that it has followed an appropriate process and its data is trustworthy based on the process that it follows. So it's essentially a self-assessment or an assertion that we have taken we have done the work, we have created a bill of material that represents the contents of our software, and we have provided information to our downstream consumers of that software so that they understand what is inside the application and they can manage the various parts that are there. Also, what we've had happen is there's been lots of activity in the EU and Europe. There have been new proposed security standards around IoT products, where software bill of material is mentioned as part of the overall process and vulnerability handling requirements. And there's been a draft of a Cyber Resilience Act in the EU, which is kind of an equivalent to the executive order that we had in the US, which is the first ever EU-wide legislation of its kind that really talks about mandatory cybersecurity requirements within any sort of digital elements and within any sort of technical applications. So there's kind of a push in the US, there's a push in the EU, and there's a push across various industry groups that really talk about having to construct a bill of material to give more transparency into applications. So now that there's a mandate, let's talk about the process, right? So OpenChain is a community organization that is the international standard for open source compliance. So Revenera is an OpenChain conformant software producer. And essentially it lays out a quality plan to balance against whatever software management program you have running in-house. It talks about the various elements of a complete program, accountability, training, being able to run proper tooling, and having an automated process so that all of the procedures happen as part of your software process. So if you're not familiar with OpenChain, there's lots of content out there available. Please look it up. It is a really good program to organize whatever processes you have in-house and make sure that they grow and mature over time into a program that provides trustworthiness into the software that you build. And then finally, our formats, right, which is important because, again, this has to be interoperable between organizations. So there's a couple leading formats out there. So Software Package Data Exchange format, which is SPDX. It's been around for a little over a decade now. And it is a bottom-up file-based report that essentially gives you the licensing information for every file in an application, along with a roll-up to what are all the packages that are included within a software product. The second standard is CycloneDX, and CycloneDX is more of a top-down view, which gives you a view of what are all the components or all the packages inside a software application. So there's various tooling out there to generate both of these formats. There's tooling to convert from one to the other, and we'll talk about how we handle being able to import both of these formats into our application. So I do want to stop here, see if there are any questions related to this. Let's see if there's one here.
Yeah, we do have one question.
Yep. So how's the bill of material from SBOM Insights different from the bill of material inventories generated by using Code Insight? So great question. So Code Insight, and we'll get to a graphic that talks about this in a minute, but Code Insight will help you construct your bill of material, but it is limited to whatever you ask it to scan, right? So as long as you have access to source code, as long as you have access to binaries, it is able to construct a bill of material for those parts. But often you may have upstream software vendors, which just give you an ISO image or deployable container, for example. Sometimes you don't have access to code, but you only get binaries from a third-party developer. Sometimes you run multiple SCA tools and you want to be able to aggregate all that information together. So SBOM Insights is really designed to pull all that data together into a single actionable unified view. And again, we'll talk about that more in a couple minutes. Any other questions here? So software format, yes. So software ID is also one that is out there. So we're not hearing lots of use around software IDs. We have seen some vendors. So for example, Adobe has embedded software ID tags into their software for tracking. So it is still a format that is out there. But from the folks that we're talking to, for the most part, people are really focusing on SPDX and CycloneDX.
That's all I see, Alex, for right now.
Okay, perfect. So again, please keep posting questions and we'll get to them. Okay, so given all that, as an organization that builds software composition analysis products, we really have a twofold mission. So number one is using our products to be able to construct a complete and accurate software bill of material to help organizations manage both legal and security risk, and to deliver compliance artifacts that are required by our customers' compliance programs. So I do want to stress kind of the importance of the second part. So a software bill of material today will not necessarily satisfy all of your legal obligations you incur by using open source software. You still have requirements around providing attribution to the authors whose code you use, providing third-party source code distributions, depending on what kind of license the component is under. So today, the software bill of material will give you a listing of components, will give you information around what versions, and along with security reports, will tell you the security exposures you have. But there's still additional artifacts that have to be produced to be compliant with licenses. So we want to make sure that our product is not only delivering SBOMs, but also able to deliver third-party notices and deliver third-party source distributions for parts that you scan and you create out of SCA tools, but also anything that you ingest into the application. And Sean will show that as part of the demo. So given all that, we are extending our solution to the cloud. So a couple of weeks ago, we introduced a new product called SBOM Insights, and it is a new SaaS solution that helps organizations manage their software bill of material in the cloud. It expands the level of transparency into organizations' products beyond the code under their control for security, legal teams, as well as supply chain partners. So again, the big kind of point to this is our SCA solution Code Insight will construct your bill of material for whatever you ask it to scan. SBOM Insights can take the information from Code Insight along with other SCA tools, along with any sort of external SBOMs in SPDX or CycloneDX formats, unify all that information together, be able to produce alerts for you, and allow you to manage these parts over time. So let's talk a little bit kind of about the why and the what. So everything I covered as far as industry overview, that's the why, right? We're pretty much seeing industry trends pointed to increased regulation across the globe, a lot more need for collaboration, a lot more need for transparency across the software supply chain. So if you look at our SCA solution and a few others, there are solutions that are on-prem, right? People don't always want to upload their code for scanning, which means all of their software bill of material data is sitting on premise behind their firewall. With the introduction of this new cloud solution, we're giving them an opportunity to retain on-prem scanning, but be able to publish the results, these software parts that we discover, into the cloud and aggregate it along with all their other data sources. So let's talk about the what, right? What are the kind of the four main things that our application will do? So first and foremost, it will import and reconcile internal and external SBOMs across multiple data sources. So what does that mean? That means that if you are running multiple SCA tools, if you're running free tools and commercial tools, they will all output different subsets of parts that they discover. There is no one perfect SCA tool out there that does 100% accuracy of discovering everything. So we always talk to our customers about run everything you can. Run tools for container scanning, run tools for source code scanning, binary scanning. The challenge is pulling all the data together. So that's something that the application will do. Number two is once you have your parts in place, well, there needs to be some refinement, right? The parts won't be perfect. In some cases, you may have partial information for a part. You may not know the license. You may not know the version. We have interfaces to be able to fix that. You need to review the parts to find out what is non-compliant, right? There may be remediation work that has to be scheduled. And certainly you need alerting because if something was approved today and tomorrow a new vulnerability comes in, or there may be a discrete licensing change that maybe prevents you from future upgrades, you need to know that and make informed decisions about what you're going to do regarding that part. Next is outbound SBOM and obligation fulfillment support. So I talked about the fact that today SBOMs don't check all the boxes for compliance. So you still need to be able to produce third-party notices reports, security reports, inventory reports, and so forth. The solution will allow you to do that for all the parts that are ingested. And then over time, we will be building a customer and partner portal to essentially get out of the document delivery business, right? Why not have a customer log in, whatever entitlements they have in place for the software that you sell, and be able to generate the reports they need themselves at the time that they need the data. So we're looking at how to be able to set the right permissions for them, let them come in, pick the applications they get to see, and then generate the SBOMs in whatever format they need, along with all the other reports that we offer. Okay, so let's kind of look at what this looks like when we overlay it on top of a supply chain. So the point of the application is to expand your SBOM perspective through SBOM construction, refinement, and utilization. So what we mean by those terms is construction is when you're putting all of your different tools together and are able to build SBOM parts based on the various scanning that you do. Refinement is making sure that your SBOM accurately reflects what is inside your application. So adjustments that are made once you ingest external SBOMs. And then utilization is really the payoff, right? It is running all the reports, getting alerts, being able to do impact assessment if a new vulnerability comes in, searching for parts based on a package URL, based on a vulnerability ID, based on a particular component or license, and really interrogating your bill of material and getting value from the work you've done to construct it. So if you look at the diagram here, this is a very kind of simplified depiction of a software supply chain. So your organization is the purple circle in the middle. You likely have one or more upstream software suppliers, and this can become a very kind of deep nested supply chain. You may sell to direct customers. You may sell to partners that then wrap your applications into their offerings, and they sell to direct customers. So likely you have consumption on the left side and outbound use cases on the right side. So today we have a product called Code Insight, which is really designed to make sure that whatever your organization has control over is scanned, documented, and the SBOM parts are constructed for that code. With the introduction of SBOM Insights, we are now able to ingest data from Code Insight, so all the work that's been done scanning your own code, along with external content from software vendors, from partners, from external developers in various formats. Then it is able to piece everything together and give you a unified software bill of material in various formats you see on the right there, including SPDX, CycloneDX, Excel, and HTML for human readable formats, along with producing third-party notices reports to satisfy the attribution requirements and security reports to be able to disclose what are the set of vulnerabilities associated with the unified software bill of material. All right, so the really important part to focus on is it expands your perspective beyond just what you're able to scan to all of the other SBOMs that you're able to ingest into the system to get a unified view into the parts that you have. And the other important part to note is we're not just storing text files, right? We're processing and parsing these SBOMs, converting them into parts that are correlated to our library that we've been collecting since 2004, and are able to make those parts actionable through querying, alerting, and generating reports based on the associated data. So there's lots of tools out there, right? There's lots of different SBOM construction tools, but this tool will allow you to see a complete SBOM that are covering multiple data sources. So given this new product, we now have 3 offerings. We have Code Insight, which is intended to be a discovery and manual analysis set of capabilities to help you construct your SBOM for the code under your control. We now have SBOM Insights, which is designed to integrate all of your internal and external SBOMs into a single unified view for across your portfolio of applications that are consisting of open source, third-party, and commercial software bill of material parts. And we have a services team that can be used to train your internal team, to accelerate any work, to extend your team's capacity, and also as part of any sort of M&A technical due diligence work that needs to be done by an independent third party. Okay, so combined, we have a nice rich set of offerings to cover both construction, adjustments, and refinement, as well as utilization of the SBOM. So let me see here. I think there's another question that came in.
I think there's a couple.
Yep, so there's one around how to merge 2 SBOMs. So we'll talk about it as Sean's doing the demo, but we are looking at several data points when we talk about reconciling parts. So I'll explain more details about that as part of the demo. How is SBOM Insights different from Dependency Track open source utility? So Dependency Track does importing, reconciling, suggests remediation, and so forth. So it is a similar use case. So Dependency Track is provided by OWASP, so the folks behind CycloneDX. It is an open source application. We find a lot of our customers are looking for a commercial solution backed with maintenance support. And we have a fairly rich roadmap to go beyond the standard use cases around being able to, to query for any sort of impact analysis, to be able to manage vulnerabilities, to be able to rescore them, to be able to suppress them going forward. So it's a similar use case, but a commercial offering to be able to integrate both all of your internal SBOMs along with external ones. Okay, do the SBOMs include snippets? How are snippets defined? A certain number of lines, code, some other way? So yes, so snippets are defined as a fragment of code that has matched external files in the open source community that is part of a file that is essentially marked as proprietary code, which has content pointing to the outside world. So yes, a snippet can be an SBOM part. A lot of this depends on the company itself and how deep they want to go with their software bill of material. So we have some customers that only do top level packages, right? Kind of a high level automated discovery SBOM. We've got other customers that use our deep forensic capability in Code Insight to vet out every single snippet of code, every single file, and their SBOMs are massive because they represent every single file in the distribution. So we offer the capability to go as deep as you want to go with a combination of Code Insight and SBOM Insights. But we also have a fully automated mode where it's integrated to the build, fully automated scanning without any sort of human intervention. So a lot of it just depends on what customers need based on the industry they're in and what their customers demand of them. Okay, so before Sean gets to the demo, I want to make sure I define a few terms that he will use, so we have a common understanding of the vocabulary here. So if you look at our SBOM Insights data model, it's kind of a three-part model. So first we have our data library. This is the content that we have been collecting since 2003. We've got over 19 million components. So we've been collecting this information across all of the repositories starting from 2003 through today. Out of the data model, we have what we call a catalog item. So a catalog item are things that are abstracted and reused from our data library. And then SBOM parts are actual instances of catalog items. So if we kind of go through it in detail, so our data library is indexed and available for all of our SBOM Insights functionality as well as an API. It includes information such as components, licenses, vulnerability data, along with relationships across these entities. It is read-only data and is globally available to all of the tenants in SBOM Insights. A catalog item is an abstraction of a unique combination of component, version, selected licenses, and vulnerabilities. So it is a specific instance of an open source component that is used across multiple SBOM parts. And then when you look at SBOM parts, they represent an instance in a given context of a catalog item. So an example would be a catalog item may be OpenSSL 101.j under the OpenSSL license. But this instance of OpenSSL may show up in multiple products and multiple places within your application. Each of those instances will be covered by a unique SBOM part because each part may have different assessment of the vulnerabilities, may have different licenses associated with it, may have different use model around modification and how it's distributed. So therefore, we want to make sure each part has its own life cycle and its own provenance. And then finally, we have buckets, which are basically a bag of parts, right? And a bucket could represent an organizational entity, but a bucket can also represent a module or a subcomponent in an application. So as an example, you can see here on the right, we've got a tree that consists of the way that we've deployed SBOM Insights internally. So we have a bucket for the Revenera division. We have a bucket for our Flexera division. Within the buckets, we've got another child bucket for software composition analysis, then a product line, which is Code Insight, and then finally you get to product releases. So everything you see outlined here in the purple box are buckets that help us organize our products into the right context within our company. And then everything below there are building blocks of applications and then parts within each bucket that together comprise a software bill of material. So these buckets are used to create hierarchy and to allow you to share a set of parts across multiple products without having to manage them multiple times. Okay, I think there's one more question here, and then we can get to the demo. So can binary files, images, XEs, DLLs be scanned using SBOM Insights? So SBOM Insights today is only for manually creating and importing SBOM parts. So Code Insight is our scanning solution, which can scan images, documents, XEs, DLLs, and so forth. But SBOM Insights is the unification platform to be able to ingest from Code Insight, as well as other SCA tools and external SBOM documents in SPDX and CycloneDX formats. We do long-term plan on creating scan agents for SBOM Insights that would run on-premise able to scan locally on premise and then upload their results to an SBOM Insight instance. But for now, the scanning all happens in Code Insight. Okay, so Sean, I think at this point we can hand it over to you for the demo.
So when you first log into SBOM Insights, this is the view that you're presented. Some high-level, information in terms of capabilities of the tool we'll get into during our demo in regards to creating and managing buckets, as well as kind of the SBOM parts and the SBOMs that are being managed within the system. High-level information in regards to, as an admin, inviting other users to your system, as well as access to videos that we have to really help onboard new users to the solution. Other documentation is available here in regards to quick start guides, API information, administration details for those users that have those rights. And then also down at the bottom is kind of a little area where we can provide any market updates or product information that we feel is important to the users. To start, the first thing I want to do here actually is create a bucket. So as Alex mentioned, the bucket really is kind of the location where things are stored, whether it be other buckets or parts. And the first thing when we're creating a bucket is all about determining, is there a parent or not? So I have the ability to specify another parent if I wished, where this bucket would then be a child of that bucket. You would then specify the name or the actual type of the bucket. So what is it? Is it an application? Is it a file? Is it a device? Is it an organization, business units? Many of these things are derived from SPDX or Cyclone DX standards. You would also specify a name. So in this case, I'll just kind of call it an application with potentially an internal code name. Then you also have the ability to enter a description. Once I save this, once I select the type and then save this, that bucket is then created and available within the system to start to store parts. So in this case, what I'll do is I'll actually import an item into the bucket I just created. And for this specific example, I'm going to take and extract from Code Insight through a project export and start to import that into the system. There is an advantage in cases when using a Code Insight export, because there's a lot of extra data that we're able to incorporate within that output that can then be ingested within Code Insight, such as third-party notices or any other potential notes or items of importance to the people that have created the project.
Yeah, and there was a question earlier around, how do you reconcile the parts? How do you pull them together from multiple SBOMs? So we've got lots of different data points we look at. So both Cyclone DX and SPDX has attributes to store the package URL. And so the package URL is kind of a combination of repository, component, and version. So that's one piece of data we use. We also look at the URL, so the project homepage or the GitHub URL. We look at the associated set of versions in our collection compared to the version that's defined in a particular part. We look at the license combination. We'll look at parts of the description in some cases. So we look at multiple data points and go through a best fit analysis and then match it up that way. So there's several different phases to the way we do the lookups.
Right. So at this point, the SBOM should be imported. So I then have the ability to go and actually look at the information. When I first come to this page, it's showing me everything within all buckets. And I have the ability to focus it down and select a specific bucket of interest. Where on the left-hand side, you can see the bucket name. We then have that part name, the component, as well as the license that is associated to the part, if it makes sense. If it is a custom part or potentially a snippet, this information may not be there. Where possible, we also, will map the vulnerability data to it, and then show you information in regards to that part. Has it been modified? When was it created, etc. When I click on a specific part, I then delve a little bit more into that specific item, where we have top level information once again. TARPs. What type of part is it? Is it linked to another part, which we'll talk about momentarily? PRL, if it's available, as well as how was it actually created? If this item is actually mapped to one of those catalog items that Alex mentioned earlier, we then provide more information in regards to that, in regards to where it came from, vulnerability data. If there is file association, whether it be from an SPDX import or a Code Insight import, that data would be shown here as well. And then potentially, other information. So any descriptions we may have, copyright data, as I mentioned, that notices text, and other specific notes as well. So I said this information was all imported from that Code Insight export. normalized and reconciled against anything else that may already be in this bucket to allow you to see the data that's in there. If you need the ability to actually create a part from scratch, that is possible as well. So I can go into the create SBOM part. Once again, I would select the bucket to actually where is it going to be. And I have the ability to create a part manually or do a lookup for a specific component. So if I'm creating something manually, this may not be described as specifically an open source component. So once again, maybe it's snippet, or maybe it's a manual file or a document that's been uploaded and being managed within SBOM Insights. So that is all possible. For my example here, I will do a lookup where you have the ability to enter a component name or a component URL and then specify specific match types. We typically recommend utilizing the URL because we tend to find that that's the most specific in regards to lookups, but you also do have the ability to type in a specific open source component name and then do a search on that. So this search is looking across all the catalog items that we currently have within the system, as well as anything we have within our knowledge base, where you'd specify version, the license, and the URL. If the item I'm looking for is not here, I can specify to go here and look for a specific version if there was one that had multiple versions based on the repository. I would select a license or potentially more than one license that's associated to the item, and then I would be able to specifically use that instance. It then pulls the data back into this panel here where you can see that data. We pre-populate the name, and that can be modified. You have the ability to specify, what type of part is it. So in this case, I'll say this is a library. Once again, these parts types do come primarily from SPDX as well as Cyclone DX specs. We also have the ability to link this part, as I mentioned earlier. So if I wanted to, I could say, this part is related to another part within my bucket. So in this case, let me select this just part as an example. And then you say, how is it specifically linked? I could say, this is an amend something. It's a dependency of, it's a build dependency. All these different types of links, once again, come from SPDX and Cyclone DX, but you have the ability to describe a relationship of one part to another part based on the selections here within the system. This allows you to create a larger hierarchy, not necessarily of just bucket to bucket, but also parts within buckets or parts to other parts as well. Other information that can be populated, the package URL, descriptions, copyrights, and then I have the ability to save this part. And now if I go back and view my SBOM and it's filtered down once again to the SBOM of interest, check out, sort by my sort date here, that item Lodash has now been created within the system. And I have the ability to look at the information just as I would if I had specifically imported that part there. We also do have the ability to merge multiple SBOMs into a single system. So in this case, let me grab my application once again. And in this case, I will actually import a Cyclone DX file that I found out on the web, and then I'll import that. If I go back to viewing my SBOM, I started with 307 items in the first place, and that item is still being imported. So let's give a second here for the refresh, or more than 1 second. And I now have 453 items being merged into a single bucket within SBOM Insights. Reporting is also key. So we do have a number of reports available, as Alex indicated. A couple of first things we'll look at would be a vulnerability report. So this would take all the information from the bucket and basically provide the information based on the vulnerability, and then provide you details in terms of which components are affected by that vulnerability, and then information about that actual vulnerability itself, such as the score, the criticality, and other information that we have within the system. This top-level view gives you a high-level summary of rolling up all that vulnerability information into a top-level view. Another example would be a third-party notices report. So we collect all the component information, list them out, as well as their specific license. So for every single item in there, we will basically create a list of those. When we click to one of these, we then go to that license. If it is a license where we have the license text with attribution, that would be provided here. So for example, here is the copyright within the system. As I scroll down, there may be other examples. And then towards the bottom of the list, any items that may be have a common license. Instead of providing each license multiple times, we have a link to a specific license within the system. So, for example, here's everything that all the components with the Apache 1.1 license would be linked to this specific location within the report. Other reports we have would be focused on the actual SBOM itself. So we do have a human readable format where we outline the component, the license, as well as the PURL in HTML format. We also have the same report that can be generated with an Excel to allow you to modify it and manipulate it as you need to. We also do create the Cyclone DX report based on the 1.4 standard. And we currently have SBDX as well, creating for SBDX version 2.2. Real quickly, the other thing I want to mention is anything that you see me do here within the UI also is available through API. So automation is something that is very important. And anything that you can do through the UI, once again, can be done through API for integration into other processes you may already have in place. All right, any questions?
Okay, and I've answered a couple in the chat.
Yeah, so, I think there's, I'm sorry, Alex. I think there's one, let's see here. Yeah, after creating a component, is there a way to tell whether a component was created manually versus ingested from external source?
Yes, good question. So, yes, so definitely anything that is manually created. So Sean showed you there's a free-form way as well as a component lookup way. Its source will be SBOM Insights. That'll be the tool that created it. And the user that is actually doing the work in the UI is the user who created it. Anything that is imported gets all of the provenance data stored as well. So when we pull in an import, I don't know if Sean went to the jobs page, but every import event has a job ID behind it. And the job includes information stored along with what type of SBOM was it, right? Whether it's SPDX, Cyclone DX, what version was it? What was the timestamp on the file? What is the tool that produced it? Who was the user who created that SBOM? Along with what is the component that SBOM represents. So all that data is stored in the product, which allows us to then, for any resulting part that came from that import job, to then give you full provenance of where that part originated, what tool it represents, and how it was constructed. So for now, all this is stored. We haven't exposed that information yet, but it is stored as part of the import. So you've got full kind of history and full provenance of every single part that came in, regardless of what the source was that brought it in. Okay, any other? I think there's one more question. Okay, yep. So there was a question I answered. I don't know if others noticed, but there's a question around which formats that we output. So we output SPDX and Cyclone DX. SPDX is outputted in a tag value format as a .spdx ASCII text file. Cyclone DX is as an XML file. We do plan on supporting additional formats for each one in subsequent releases, but there are some several converter tools out there that you can use. So if you wanted, SPDX in a JSON format, you can convert tag value to JSON. If you go to the SPDX ecosystem or cyclonedx.org, they've got tooling out there to be able to do that. We will also be expanding the import formats as well. So there's been some requests by our customers to import Excel, for example. So we will be going beyond just SPDX and Cyclone DX to other formats for any sort of homegrown tooling or any other formats customers have. Okay, so got just a couple more slides.
There's actually another question in there in regards to vulnerability data.
Yeah, vulnerabilities.
So, as I said, we are able to take vulnerability data for information that's being brought in from Code Insight as well as external sources. So along with that, we also will be providing alert information. So if a new vulnerability is discovered for a component that's within the system, that you would be alerted for that. We are also looking to expand that into a number of the items here in regards to health information. Is a repository stale? Are there new new versions? Are you X number of versions back, et cetera? So we are looking to expand that the kind of that alerting mechanism to go above and beyond just vulnerabilities itself to information like repository health and everything else.
Yep. And also having a cloud solution allows us to crowdsource data. So if we have customers adding in any sort of notes or anything about components, there will be an opportunity for them to publish that globally, so other tenants are able to see that information as well. Okay, so wanted to summarize kind of how we see various stakeholders and various personas using this type of application. So we are essentially positioning SBOM Insights as a source of truth for your SBOM parts across your organization. So it is able to provide compliance artifact support, impact analysis by being able to search for parts using various criteria. Over time, we will add usage insights and trends and alerts into the system. So SBOM Insights can be fed through multiple sources, right? So whatever process your product teams follow, whether it's manual disclosures, whether it's scanning using Code Insights, SIFT, or whatever other industry tools are out there, there is an import capability across all those tools. Externally, we're able to pull data from software vendors, from partners, from external developers via, as we talked about, SPDX, CycloneDX, and in the future, Excel, as well as other flat file formats. When we now talk about consumption, right? So legal and open source program office folks, they would use SBOM Insights to manage their policies and to be able to generate compliance artifacts that their program requires. If we're talking about security folks, right? They would be looking for security alerts. They would be able to do impact analysis. So let's say a new vulnerability comes out, you key in the vulnerability ID, we will show you all the SBOM parts across all the products that contain that vulnerability. And if that vulnerability has not been suppressed or rescored, that query will match that record. Also, security teams are interested in SBOMs for composition, as well as VDR and UX reports, so vulnerability disclosure reports, and then a report on which vulnerabilities are actually enforced and exploitable in the particular application. So these are things that we will be working on early next year, those two reports. If you're looking at product teams, they need compliance alerts, right? If a developer modified a manifest file, checked it in, did a build, and suddenly that upgraded a component, and there's a new vulnerability, or perhaps there's a non-compliant license with that upgrade, the product teams will receive an alert that there is a remediation work to be done. Management, right? So data rollups, usage insights, trends over time. What are the most common components we use? What are the most common licenses we use? What are the oldest vulnerabilities that haven't been remediated? So you have some intelligence around how to deploy limited resources to remain in compliance. And then finally, as I mentioned, we are looking into also building out a customer and partner portal. So allowing customers to come in, self-service, and really be able to generate whatever artifacts they need at any given point in time. So in summary, lots of tools out there to give you information about software parts, but SBOM Insights really gives you a complete SBOM covering multiple data sources. So the main goal of it is to allow you to assess risk and perform impact analysis, not just on the code that you developed and you have control over, but also on all the software components coming in from outside your organization. So happy to take any additional questions. There's a link below here, and I think Kendra will post it into the chat. So if you want to get any more information about the product, data sheets available, lots of things in the handouts. Let me see here. I think there's a new question here. SBOM Insights are back enabled. Yes. So right now, everything we showed in the demo are local accounts. It does support single sign-on, so you can pass users through by configuring it with single sign-on in your organization. And then, yes, there are roles to control who can create SBOMs, who can view them, which organizations are accessible by different users. So there's protection around who can create data, who can view data, who can export data. Okay, any other questions?
Not seeing any others so far. To Alex's point, I did put a link in the chat, public chat, to learn more about SBOM Insights. There's a URL there. You see that on your screen on this slide as well, but I posted it in the chat in case you need it. And remember, there's more in handouts as well. One last second for any additional questions. No, I think we're good.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for your time.
Yeah, Alex, Sean, thank you. Great webinar. Good participation from our audience as well. We love the questions. So we want to thank all of you, our audience, for joining us today. If you want to continue the discussion, feel free to reach out to Alex and Sean. Their contact information is shown here on the slide. And as I said, we invite you to learn more about SBOM Insights at that link that you see there in what I posted in the chat. Thank you. And thank you to everyone. Have a great rest of your day.